Okay, so we stopped last week at Lamed Amid Beis by the Mishnah. We actually started the Mishnah, which I'll review. The next Mishnah in Perek Sheni of Bava Metzia, as we continue on our discussions of the various aspects of Metzia. We've touched on so many different parts of the question. Here, this Mishnah is actually maybe this Mishnah should have been said a lot earlier because it's a fundamental question. The Mishnah on Lamed Amid Beis says, Ezehu Aveda. Okay, we're talking about an Aveda. We're talking about someone finding something, and then we go into all kinds of different questions and permutations based on that. But what's the basic question? The basic question, what's an Aveda? How do we determine when something is an Aveda or is not an Aveda? So let's just review this Mishnah. Ezu Aveda, says the Mishnah, Motza Chamor O Para, Rowan Badera. If someone is, I guess, today driving along, in those days they had a wagon or they walked, they saw a Chamor or a Para that was grazing on the side of the road. Ezu Aveda. That's a normal thing to see an animal grazing. You can't assume that it's lost. However, Chamor V'Kelav Afuchin, if you see a donkey with its kalim having fallen off the back and the donkey is down on the ground with the kalim, that's not a normal appearance. Para rotza ben akramim, or a cow that is running in the vineyard. And here we'll get into this discussion more deeply. It's running in the vineyard. Harizu Aveda. Says the Mishnah, this is an Aveda because these are not natural things. They're not natural. So Rashi says, Eza Aveda b'Gemara Mefarish, Eza Aveda be'ena chayav lahagzer shemidas hanichum sham. In other words, basically, what is something that is considered a normal course of events? So Rashi says, Rotza ben akramim de mistakva. If an animal is running between in the vineyards, it will be ripped by the thorns or by the sharp edges of the vine. So in other words, that's what is not the norm. That it's running in the vineyard means it's getting hurt. So that's what identifies it as an aveda. Okay, so those are the examples that the Mishnah gives, and from that we extrapolate all kinds of other possibilities. What happens if it's an Aveda, he runs after it, captures it, brings it back, and it runs away again, even 4 and 5 times? Says the Mishnah, there is no end to how many times he should attempt to capture the animal to return it. Shenema Hoshev Teshivaim, it says Hoshev Teshivaim, that you should return it. And that Hoshev Teshivaim, obviously, we interpret to be without limitation. Then we went on in the rest of the Mishnah and we said, Hoya Batal Misela, if there was a day worker who worked wages for a day for a job, let's say he got $100 for a job. Lo Yomer Lo Kain Li Sela. So when he finds the animal and returns it, he should not say, I had to disturb my day job, give me a sela, give me the $100. And this is without any pre-negotiation. Okay, no negotiation. He went ahead, he jumped the gun, he saw an animal in distress, he picked it up, brought it back. He said, you know what, my day is shot, give me a sela. So the owner, when he gets it, he thanks him very much and says, I really only owe you a wage of an earner. You worked an hour and a half, and the let's say the standard is so and so. So I'll give you whatever it is, $25, whatever the amount is, but I'm not going to give you a sela. I'm not going to give you the whole $100 for the whole day's work, because that's not appropriate. So the Mishnah says that without precondition, that's the discussion that goes on. Now, Im Yesham Bezdin, if he is in a place where he can convene a Bezdin, Masna B'fnei Bezdin, the finder has the right to go before the best and says, listen, I can go ahead and find this animal, but if I do, I want to be paid my day's wages because my day is shot. So it's not fair to pay me less than what I would have gotten had I worked all day, even though I would have worked more hours. Because let's say it takes 2 hours to find the animal and he works 8 hours. So you can argue, well, okay, that's 25%. You should get 25%. You could say, no, I'm ready to work 8 hours for $100. I was disrupted. I can't do it. I want my $100. If it takes me 2 hours or 3 or 4 or 1, doesn't matter. I want my $100. So if he goes before Bezdin can say yes or no, and then he has to make a decision. In Ein Sham Bezdin, if there is no Bezdin b'pnei mi yasne, before whom does he make his argument? Shalo kodem, says the Mishnah. Then his own act, his own work comes first, and that's consistent with what we said before. Is that a person has to take care of his own needs before he take care of the need of someone else. And we saw that from the previous Gemara, when the Gemara was trying to understand under what situation does one not have to return, or does not one not have to be, what is not Mechayev Hoshev Teshiveh. So we said that in the case where you're working your work and you would give up a lot of money in order to do the fine, then Hoshev Teshiveh is set aside because of the two words for his salamta. One is salamta is that you cannot overlook it, and one that you can overlook. When can you overlook? So we gave examples: a kohen in a beis hakvaros, or a person who is working his own work, or a zaken where it's not in his honor to do it. Those are part of the his salamta, which you are allowed to look away. So basically, this Mishnah is enforcing that view. And again, this is a balancing test. It's always a balancing test between doing the right thing and for someone else, and doing the right thing for yourself. So the Gemara is in a very practical way says, and we saw it from the bottom of Lamed Amud Aleph to the top of Lamed Amud Beis. Remember, we said Lo yeh b'cha evyom shalcha kodem. You shouldn't turn yourself into a poor person. Your work is first. I mean, you have to take care of your family, your livelihood. So therefore, he can if you give me my wage, I'll do it. If not, not. Says Rashi, Lo yoma lo ten li sela shebatalti min mamlachti, because I interrupted my work. Sheyoma lo im asisa malachtecha hayisa mar b'torah achshav l'flima shetercha tol. Because he's saying, you didn't do 8 hours. You only did 2 hours. So that's the taina of the owner. He says, I'll pay you a fair wage, but you have to be fair with me too. So it says Kapol, the Gemara Mefarish, Im yesham bezdin in nochlo litroch yoser kedei laharba schar v'enu chafetz levatel l'malachto ma'yaseh. What should he do if he doesn't want to interrupt his work because he's getting paid? Im yesham shlosha b'nei odam yasne b'fneihem. He should stand before them and have a din Torah. V'yoma ru'usha ani mistake kach v'kach v'efshel levatel little schar muat. I can't stop and take less money. And the eshev im tomer she'etel schar b'shalem. If you tell me you'll pay me what I would have gotten for doing that work, I'll go ahead and start searching and bring you back the animal. So again, it's a balancing test, and the Mishnah tells us how that comes out.
Two quick comments. One is I took a look, I Googled it. It turns out that there's apparently a thing in the livestock, probably not everywhere, but in general in the livestock industry now, where they put RFID tags on every animal, and therefore they can keep track of things. And if an animal gets lost, you could figure out right away who it belongs to. Related to that, though, is the question I have on this mission. It's not clear to me, maybe it's clear to everybody else, is when we're talking about returning the animal here, maybe multiple times, etc., is this an animal where the person finds the animal by the side of the road or whatever and says, this is a lost animal, and he knows where it's going? Because I don't because who it belongs to, because I don't see a whole thing here about having to. It takes time to return an animal, but I don't see anything about having to call out and find out that anybody lose an animal, etc.
No, so this Mishnah is assuming all the things we assumed until now, meaning that if he sees an animal that looks like it is lost, then he has to do what the previous Mishnahs and Gemaras told us. He has to take it into his barn, he has to feed it, he has to take care of it. So
So that's more than just oh, it's going to take me 2 hours to deal with schlepping this animal around today. It could be something that extends on and on and on.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Right. So the Mishnah isn't giving us all the gory details, but everything that we know about finding an animal applies here. If it's a quick fix, great. If it's not a quick fix, then he has to do what we learned previously. He has to house it and feed it and whatever. Right. Exactly.
Excuse me. What happens the second day or the third day? Does he have this obligation every day?
Meaning what? Meaning
the maintenance of the animal.
Yes, of course. He has to maintain the animal till he can find it. Then the question is, at some point, does he sell it and just to hold the money? In other words, those are all the discussions we've had previously. Is what are his obligations and how far does he have to go? So again, an owner rather have his own animal or his own chayfetz more than something else, but it's not fair to the finder. I mean, the finder can't be busy, 24/7 taking care of somebody else's animal. He has his own work to do. So those are all the balancing tests that we talked about. But Hoshek Teshivain, in its best form, means returning the original animal to the owner. If you can't do that because no one's coming up, then you can't require him to do this day and night. So obviously, then he has to sell it to the highest, keep the money, etc. Yeah.
He would also be announcing it, wouldn't he?
Say again.
He'd also be announcing it, wouldn't he?
Of course, he's announcing it, and the word is being spread that yeah, exactly right. So hopefully that will hasten its return, and he won't be chayav further. But again, the Mishnah is giving us sort of the balancing test as to what the achrayus is and what the expectation is on behalf of the finder. So that's the basic Mishnah, and again, this Mishnah is the cornerstone of everything we've ever actually already learned over these many blot as far as what is an Aveda. So now the Gemara has a curious question. Says the Gemara, Otu kol hana damrina lav Aveda hava. We've been learning, just like I said, we've been learning now for many blots the whole subject of Aveda, and the Gemara has given us different examples of Aveda, whether it has to do with animate or inanimate or all kinds of objects. Now the Mishnah comes and gives us sort of a defining word on Aveda. What is that all about? This is not the first time we've discussed like an Aveda. I mean, we've taken for granted, we've said, someone finds, let's say, money, or someone finds an object of a certain type. Those are Avedas. Those are Avedas, and we had that discussion. So what is the Mishnah now, all of a sudden out of the blue, coming to give us a sort of a mini seminar on what's an Aveda? I mean, we've already had, at least in general terms, that discussion. So that's a good kasha. I mean, this kasha, where's this Mishnah coming from? Rabbi Yehuda Hachakama. So Rabbi Yehuda clarifies, and he says, no, Ezehu Klal Aveda Shuhu Chayav. I'm going to give you a primer on what does an Aveda look like? I mean, obviously it comes in all sizes, shapes, animate, inanimate, big, small. But when you look at something through your mind's eye, how are you supposed to think of it? So this example that he gives from the Mishnah is going to help us extrapolate for every Aveda that you might find. That's the intent. The intent is to give us a rule. Klal. Klal Aveda. What's the klal? So that's what the Mishnah is coming to say. So so as a general rule, is it normal to see an animal grazing on the side of the road? Of course it is. I mean, in those days for sure. So now you have to, in your mind's eye, when you find something, say, does that sound like an animal grazing on the side? Now, obviously, you're not talking about an animal. You're talking about something totally different. but how normal is what you see in comparison to other things? That's the klal. So if you see an animal grazing on the side, which is perfectly normal, that's not an aveda. Anything that looks, smells, tastes, or has any shaykhs to that kind of event is not considered an aveda, right? But chamor bekelev hafuchim, para b'ratza ben akramim hazer aveda mechayva. Now, if you see an animal laboring under its burden and it's on the ground, that's a completely different view than an animal grazing on the side. So you immediately see that there is a distress here. There's something not, in the normal order of things. That's what you have to consider. So if you see something that looks like it falls into the category of a chamor with its burden hafucha, then you have to say that's an aveda. Now, people have imaginations. I mean, people look at things, and some people might think that something that's perfectly normal is an aveda. I mean, that you can't help. But by and large, if we're reasonable people, instinctively we will say, that looks like an aveda. I better jump in here and try to do something. Maybe sometimes you make a mistake, but I think as a general rule, this is what the Mishnah is trying to tell us: what's normal or ordinary, and what is extraordinary or not in the normal course. And so the latter is what is an aveda, chamor b'kela, or even again, we're going to talk about this para, because this para ratza ben akramim becomes an interesting discussion. But let's just say that a cow running through the vineyard is not a normal event. It's not where a cow should be, because he's getting hurt. He's getting hurt. So now that's how Rabbi Yehuda interprets the Mishnah, that this isn't, up until now, we've been spotting different kinds of things that happen, and we say this is an aveda, this is not an aveda, and he's chayiv or not chayiv. Now, the Mishnah is actually giving us sort of what we call the black letter law, the actual doctrine. This is an aveda, this is not an aveda, and you have to adjust accordingly. Okay. Says Rashi, klal stam aveda shemuchecha shehisham shalom edas balim. So, in other words, what he's saying is that when you see an aveda, you have to assume that the owners do not know about it. In other words, shalom edas balim, it's something that's happening without the knowledge of the owner, and therefore it's an aveda. So maybe that's a key word. Shalom edas balim is that the owner is not aware. So you now have to extrapolate from what you see. Is this something that the owner would be aware of and approve? Would he approve of a cow running through a kerem and getting all scratched up? No, of course he wouldn't. So if you see that, you immediately say, that's an aveda. Okay, so now it gives us a better picture of what this Mishnah is about. And now we have to use our own judgment. We may come to different conclusions about the same event. I'm not saying that 100% will all think the same way, but I think by and large, we get the picture that, something that we would think that the owners would know about is not an aveda, that would know about, and something they wouldn't know about is an aveda. Frank the Gemara hula olam, and bitmia, says Rashi. In other words, when you look at this animal, you have to make some kind of a judgment whether this animal is lost or not lost. So the Gemara asks, la'olam, and forever, if that animal, you find that animal in that posture, do you have to assume it's an aveda? That's an interesting question. In other words, you walk along and you see an animal grazing, no problem. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Erev Shabbos, that animal is there all the time. Is that an aveda? In other words, it's okay that it's grazing, but it's grazing there all the time. You have to make some assumption that maybe the cow got away, the owner doesn't know where it is, and it's just sitting there grazing all the time. So even though it's a normal event, the kasha is, how long do you have to figure that it's there before it dawns on you, maybe this is really an aveda? even though it's an ordinary looking thing. Because Roa ben Aderech is an ordinary looking thing. So that's the Gemara's kasha. Says Bitmia, v'ki af aniyim t'sen Hashem la'olam, nema bedasi, v'ki derech shelo lahachnis. Isn't the animal going to go somewhere? Is it going to go to a barn? Is it going to go walking to, some other place? So that's the Gemara's kasha. In other words, is there a time limit, even when you say that it's not an Aveda? Is there a time limit before you have to be suspicious that maybe it is an Aveda? That's the Gemara's kasha. Well, forever. I'm Rabbi Yehuda Marav. No, at Shlosha Yamin. You wait 3 days. In other words, if you go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, okay, by the time Thursday comes, or certainly Friday, that animal is there, you have to assume it's an Aveda, at least in the normal course, because why is it there all the time? Maybe it got lost. So at least the Gemara is giving us some parameter and saying 3 days, and also Chazaka is 3, so maybe they pick 3 because 3 is is maybe that's a normal thing. I don't know that you can impute that an animal understands it's there for 3 days as opposed to 4 or 5. I mean, an animal may not know. It's there. But from our standpoint, we make assumptions. We say if it's doing its thing, don't bother. But if it's doing its thing more than it should, bother.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Why do we have such a complicated scenario here? If somebody sees an animal grazing out in the field, wouldn't it be easier just to say, look, you're required to announce that that somebody has an animal all the way out at the end of the field, and we don't know whether it's lost or not. Why shouldn't you want to start that right away? Because you don't know how many days it was out there. You saw it on Sunday. You don't know if it was out there on Thursday, Friday, Shabbos. It may not be the first day just because you saw it for the first time. So why shouldn't you ask whoever finds something that you're obligated to announce right away, because you don't know how many days it seems to be in a place that doesn't make sense?
So that's
that would simplify the whole process.
Right. No, that's a very good question, because why not take the tack that as soon as I see something, I should announce it? And the logical answer here is you're not prevented from doing that. In other words, you see an animal and you come to the base medrash or wherever the gathering point and says, oh, by the way, I saw this cow along the way there, just heads up. There's no reason not to do that. The Gemara isn't saying don't do that. I think what the Gemara's intent here is showing us within the framework of the halacha. Okay, we have a halacha, Hashem Teshiveh. This is what you should do. You are busy. I'm busy. I'm running around doing my parnasa. You're doing your parnasa. What the Gemara is telling us is everybody has a certain burden and achrayus to himself and to the cloud. So remember, we learned about lifnim mishuras hadin. Sure, I can immediately start hunting for the owner to make sure that that animal is safe and wasn't there since last Thursday. 100% right. But the Gemara is not telling us that approach. The Gemara is saying, what's the approach if you're busy, you're running around, you don't really have time to run around and immediately make announcements and everything else. So we're going to give you a break. What's the break? You saw it. Maybe someone else saw it since last Thursday and will announce it. You don't know that. In other words, you're only speaking of yourself. You're right. You saw it on Sunday. I saw it the previous Thursday. I could be already making the announcement before you. But from your standpoint, what's you as an individual, what's your achrayus? Says the Gemara, your achrayus is 3 days. But that doesn't mean you can't do it earlier. It's just don't do it after 5 days. Don't wait longer, because then you may, that may hurt. But earlier, never a problem. So I think, again, the Gemara is giving us within the framework of what is the halacha, this is what you should do. You want to do more or better or different, fine, you get a bracha, right? So I don't think that this is a steer, but it's a good, interesting question, is because, why aren't we being more proactive? The answer is we can be, but this is what the halacha tells us. The halacha tells us when you see it, You count 3 days. When I see it, I count 3 days. So that I think that's really where that comes out.
So it's really a kula for the one who finds it,
Yes.
to burden him right away.
It's imposing upon him what the halacha requires of him. Now he can be l'fnim shor sadin, like we learned, or someone else can step in and say, I saw it before you. I'm going to make the announcement. So I think that's how you balance it out. So now the Gemara is going to go a little bit further. The Gemara is going to understand. We say 3 days. What does 3 days mean? Hey chadami, lusa. If he saw it late at night, I feel a chodesh shatanami. Why is he waiting 3 days? Why is an animal out alone by itself grazing in the middle of the night? So in other words, the Gemara is now going to try to understand what this 3-day standard is. If it was at night, then he better act maybe more quickly. Ibi yamama, if it was in the middle of the day, afilu tuvanami. In other words, going back to the question, what do we care if the animal is grazing for 5 days? If it's at middle of the day, that's what an animal does. An animal goes out and eats every day. So why am I rushing to say this is an Aveda just because I saw it 5 days in a row? So in other words, the question is, what is this 3 day? Why is this 3 days so important that you say 3 days? It could be sooner if it's at night, and it could be longer if it's in the middle of the day. So again, we're trying to develop an understanding to extrapolate what the pasuk is telling us. Clearly, Hoshef Teshivim is a very important mitzvah, right? To care for someone else's belongings and to take care of somebody else is a big achrayus. We are all achroi to each other. So the Gemara is trying, without being too obtuse, trying to find a standard that someone could recognize and say, this is my achrayus. So we picked 3 days. Fine, 3 days makes sense. Why 3 days? Animals don't normally graze in the middle of the night. And if you find in the middle of the night, you better hurry up and announce it, because now it's really lost. And vice versa in the day, it could be a very normal event for a week at a time. And for the Gemara lo tzricha, so the Gemara says no, that you know what, 3 days is not really the total standard. It's not be all and end all, as we say. The chazale bikad masa v'chashachta. Lasa yomrim omrin isrami la v'nafka. In other words, the 3-day standard isn't the regular 9 to 5, let's call it. If he saw it b'kadmasa, kadmasa means by the time you get up to daven vasikin, that animal is already out there grazing. Is that normal? I don't know. Uvachashachta, it's already ben hashmoshes. It's already night. Animals out there grazing. Is that normal? Says the Gemara, if you see him at Alos HaShachar, or you see him by Shkia 3 days in a row, then you say, okay, that's his standard. That's when the animal goes out. Animal likes to go out early in the morning or late at night. Tefei vade aveda. More than 3 days, it's an aveda. So that doesn't negate what we just said. If you find an animal between 9 and 5 grazing along the way, you have to assume everything is normal. 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. You don't jump the gun and say, oh boy, he's been there too long, because that's what an animal does. An animal is let out of a barn. Sometimes an animal has a favorite watering hole. It goes to that spot, and there he sits and eats all day. So you don't worry about it. When do you worry, says the Gemara? Only when he does something that is not the norm. I don't know how normal it is. I mean, I did grow up on a farm, but I had no cows, so I don't remember cows getting up. Maybe they get up on a Los Shachar at early morning and go out and graze, or graze way into the night. But presumably, according to this Gemara, that's not the norm. So 3 days is a standard for an animal that is doing something that is not quite the norm. That's what the Gemara is telling us. But if it's the Kadmusa, says Rashi, before the morning star, that means you're talking about early. Kashachta, Teshchachas Arvis. It's already Shkia. So those are the times that we impose the 3-day requirement. But other than that, we don't say 3 days. We say that, and again, this is now your instinct. You see an animal and let's say you go to work a certain way, and every single day you go to work that way, and every single day you see an animal grazing along the side. Are you worried that that animal is lost? Says the Gemara, you don't have to be worried, because that's what is the norm. Now, Jay, to your point, if a person wants to say, you know what, just to be on the safe side, I'm going to go ahead and make an announcement. I see this animal along the side, here, and here. Did anybody lose it? Whatever. I mean, you're not precluded from doing that. Question is, what's your achrayus? Because going to the courthouse, or going to the shul, or going and making the announcement and taking the time, that's all a little bit of a tircha. Not a lot, let's say, but a little bit of a tircha. And so the question is, how much tircha do you have to, how much effort do you have to put in to be mekayim this mitzvah? So again, totally balancing test, totally balancing. And you see from this whole Mishnah and the Gemara that it's all based on seichel. Your seichel tells you what I see is normal or out of the ordinary, and that's when you react. If you think it's out of the ordinary, then that you consider that an aveda. I might not consider it an aveda, but you do. You have the mitzvah hashav teshiva, but something that is everybody will admit is the norm. There's no mitzvah hashav teshiva. There's nothing lost. Now, truly, it may be lost. We don't know that, but we assume it's not lost because it falls into the pattern of something that is what we would call the normal course of events.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
If you see a cow that's hanging around grazing for 3 days, it's very unlikely that he's lost, because if a cow, well, I'll give you a personal experience. I have cows.
Wait a minute, David. You may be a country guy, and you know that. I'm a
Well, yeah,
city
that's
guy.
why I'm going to give you my experience from it.
Right.
I have cows on my property.
Right,
I
but
don't
a
have
city,
one now,
a city,
but I've
yeah,
had it.
but David, a city guy might not know that. A
So
city guy
but
might
if
not
he's
know that.
standing around, he's going to be there. If once he's liberated from the fence, he's not going to hang around and nibble food or chew on something. He's going to just keep getting away and wandering. So
Right.
if he's standing there, he's going to stay. If he's walking around, then the chances are he's lost.
So David, you just hit on the mother lode of the question that we're now going to address. You just raised the very point that the Gemara is now going to discuss in detail, whether he's stationary or whether he is mobile.
No.
That's a very good point, and that's how the Gemara is now going to try to understand: is he lost if he's mobile or not? That's the question. Okay, very good. So the bottom line of Lamed Amid Beis, Zak the Gemara, Tanya Nami Hachet. Not only is this the answer to our questions, but I'm going to bring you a brisa that supports the view that we just said. What's the brisa? Motza talus for cardome. If he finds a talus, a beged, or a cardome is an axe, but asartia, it says we're up to Lamed Aleph Amid Aleph, the top, the first line. Rashi says asarta derech kvishas rabin. It's a thoroughfare where people walk. So if he finds a talus or an axe in the thoroughfare, upara rotza ben akramin, or a cow that's running in the vineyard, harizu aveda. This is the brisa. He's quoting the brisa. Harizu aveda. This is an aveda, says the brisa. However, talus b'tzad geder. If he finds a talus that is pushed up against a fence, or kardam b'tzad geder, or an axe that is leaning against a fence, upara roe ben akramin, or a cow that is grazing between the vineyards, not running between the vineyards, but grazing between the vineyards, ein zu aveda, says the brisa. So he's making a distinction between a cow that runs through the vineyard or a cow that is stationary in the vineyard, just nibbling on the grass or whatever it is that he's nibbling on. So, okay, so that's the brisa. Now the Brisa goes on to say, Gimel Yomim Ze'achazeh Harizu Aveda. If it's 3 days consecutive, you consider it an Aveda. So now this Beferish Brisa will support what we just said before, that there's a 3-day standard, and that 3-day standard, if you see, he doesn't mean 3 days, he means more than 3 days. So if you see it there more than 3 days consecutively, then you assume that it's an Aveda, and you have to announce it. So now we have a Beferish Brisa that supports the view of the Gemara, and we'll see how that plays out. But notice that this Brisa makes a chiluk between running or being stationary. To your point, David, if it's running between the kramim, then it's considered an Aveda. Why? Because it will scratch itself all over by the vines within, because the vines are very narrow and there's not really a passageway, so it'll scratch itself. If the cow just walks in and stays in one place, it's not hurting itself. All it do is, I mean, maybe it got a scratch from walking in, I don't know, but it's not scratching itself constantly because it's staying in one place and just eating. So that's the chiluk that the Brisa makes, and that's important because now the Gemara is going to go into more detail on this whole discussion. Okay.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yes.
Question. This whole inyan we're talking about, is it in any way dependent on how much time the one who finds it would take to go back to town, this and that? You know, if he's on a horse or if he has to walk, the 3 days gives him a lot more time to then decide he has to do something. But if transportation was like today, we have cars, would anything change? Because the one who finds it can go right away in 10 minutes, he'd be back in town and can make an announcement.
So I don't think that the Gemara is taking into consideration the time it takes to make the announcement as much as it is evaluating what is the norm for the animal. Sure, I mean, again, to your point, you made the point very early on. Why wait 3 days? Why not announce it right away? If a person is conscientious and says, I saw an animal there, it's no big deal for me to take my car, turn around, as I'm driving back, I'll go and clap on Tish, and I'll make an announcement. By the way, I saw an animal along the property of so-and-so, heads up. No problem, you can do that. Obviously, that's not what was going on in those days, like you say, and people weren't as mobile. So, but the sequence of the Gemara isn't dependent on his ability to announce as much on what we're saying is the norm for the animal. So obviously they had in mind that they knew from historic evidence that it's not so gefährlich if an animal is out there for days at a time, but more than 3 days already sounds not right.
Okay.
So it was more focused on the animal than on your ability to make the announcement. You can make the announcement, as we said, as early as you want, but you shouldn't wait more than 3 days because the 3 days to the animal is about the end of the line when we say that's normal. So we're going really towards the animal, not towards you.
Thank you.
Right. So, this goes to the debate that goes on in our times, whether someone is a constitutionalist, whether or not he looks to the Constitution. You look to the Constitution, you try to understand what the Constitution says, notwithstanding that we're in 2022, or those who say, no, we have to have more of a open understanding that what our forefathers in the 1800s didn't anticipate the 21st century, so we have to bend and shape to accommodate the 21st century. That's the ongoing debate and the ongoing discussion. Lahavdil in halacha doesn't change. The halacha is the same halacha that appeared at the time of the Buddha Nasi is the same halacha today. We don't say it's a different halacha. So today, if we follow the halacha and the halacha says 3 days, then it's 3 days, notwithstanding that, oh, today you can do it in 6 hours. Why should you wait 3 days? So again, you have to sort of think in terms of what was in mind here at the time. Now, the Brisa adds one other interesting note. Okay, on the fourth line, raw mayim sheshotfin uboin harizegode b'fneihem. Says the Brisa, if you saw, let's say, a dam burst, and there was a whole slew of water that was coming down, let's say it was going downhill, and you saw that it was going to completely wash out a field that was at the bottom of that hill, do you have an achrayus to protect that land? Says the Brisa, Ro Maim Sheshotfin Uboin, and he has the ability to build a fence, meaning he's not going to build a whole fence, but let's say he can put some rocks together or wood or something to build a barrier. Says the Brisa, he has to do it. So this is giving us a whole new view. Says Rashi, Sheshotfin Uboin L'soda Chaveiro. Is this part of Hoshev Teshiveh? In other words, we're thinking of Hoshev Teshiveh, that there is something that's already there, and you have to make a decision. Is this an Aveda? Do I announce it? And that's the whole system of Aveda that we've been talking about until now. All the same. All of a sudden, this Brisa is introducing a different concept of Aveda.
Right,
You have an
proactive.
advantage to protect someone's field, and that's an Aveda. If you can. If you can protect someone's field, you have that achrayus because that's an Aveda.
You have to be proactive.
You
in
have to be
protecting.
proactive, says this Brisa. Exactly.
And by inference, if you see an open gate in your friend's field and the cow is near the open gate, and you know it's just a matter of time before it goes into this gate, which was mistakenly left open, do you have an achrayus to close that?
Good question. Good point. Right. In other words, it's the same concept. Can you prevent the problem before it even becomes a problem?
Are you obligated to prevent the preventable?
Exactly. So
How are you deciphering friends? I mean, if the person is not your friend, if it's just stranger, do you still, or is it just using the word friend, meaning another Jewish person?
Another Jewish person, because everybody's a friend. Everybody's a friend. In other words, the mitzvah is on you and me, whether we know him or don't know him or whatever it is. If you see a disaster about to happen, and to another fellow Jew, you have an achrayus. Right, like today. I mean, we're in the middle of a war, and people are in jeopardy. Do you have an achrayus to help? If you can somehow do something to help. There's this one fellow, by the way, that they interviewed. He may be Israeli, or I don't know who he is, but his name is Shlomo, and they were interviewing him. He was a little bit. I mean, they asked him if he's Ukrainian. He said he's not Ukrainian. He said, "I'm here to help people get out of Ukraine." So he could have been, for all we know, he could have been a Mossad agent. I don't know who he was, but he was clearly a Jewish fellow, and he took it upon himself as an achrayus to help his fellow Jew. So he appeared, and he was shuttling people out of Ukraine to Poland or wherever it was. That's pshat in a general sense. It's pidyon shvuyim, but it's also, you talk about Hoshev Teshiveh. I mean, in a larger sense, what you're doing is you're helping your fellow Jew, and that's what Hoshev Teshiveh is. It's nothing more than the mitzvah of helping a fellow Jew, and in this particular case, it's about lost objects. But what happens if it's not lost objects? If it's pidyon shvuyim, if it's saving a life or redeeming redeeming someone who was kidnapped, all the same. It's all the same mitzvah. Okay. So now the Brisa has given us an introduction to a different topic as well. And now the Gemara is going to pick up on all of this. Omar Rava says, Rava, I'm going to do a drash, the following. It says in the pasuk that by Hoshev Teshiveh, it says the words L'chol Avedus Achicha. In the middle of the pasuk, it says Chamor, Seh, Shor, Por, whatever. And then it says L'chol Avedus Achicha, which is a catch-all phrase, right? It's a catch-all phrase because we identified, and the previous Gemaras explained to us why they picked the individual animals, Seh, Simla, Chamor, Shor. Remember that Gemara? Those were 4 individual examples. And then it says l'chol avedas achicha, meaning sui generis everything. What is that? Says Rava, l'rabos avedas karka. This is where I learned from that brisa that you have to protect the land from the water. I learned it from the chol avedas achicha that if your friend owns a piece of land, you have a responsibility to protect his land if you can. That's Rava's interpretation of the words of the pasuk. Okay, Rashi, Omar Rava l'chol avedas milsa ba'apin nafshehi. It's a separate discussion. In other words, this wasn't part of the discussion about Hashef Teshivain. Rava was giving a shiur in the base medrash, and he said in that shiur, in the base medrash, by the way, the pshat in the chol avedas achicha is l'rabas avedas karka. So he made that, Rava made that statement. Now, Omalei Rav Chananya l'Rava. So here, this is very interesting. Rav Chananya says to Rava, Tanya, the Messiah loch. There's a brisa. You're giving a shiur in the yeshiva, and you're making this comment. There's a beferish brisa like what you say. What's the brisa? Raw mind sheshotfin. If you see, we just learned that brisa, right? You saw water pouring down from the mountain, uboyin, and it's about to overrun this fellow's land. How does it go to b'fneihem? He has to build a fence. That's what you just said. You just said that karka, meaning up until now, we assumed what? That an aveda was metaltalin. An aveda was something movable, right? The pasuk tells us an animal, a shirt, a wallet, a ring, you name it. Those are all metaltalin, movable objects. The movable object, you have an achrayus to return. How do I know if it's not movable? You have to quote unquote return it, meaning protect it. You have a brisa. Comes Rava and he says, no, you have to do it. So Chananya says to him, wait a minute, Rava. Tanya the Messiah, the bar, was a good b'fneihem. So you're right on you're Johnny on the spot because it's a brisa. So Rava comes back and it says, no, Amalek. No, if you would have just learned the brisa and you wouldn't have heard my shiur, meaning my take, Rava obviously gave the shiur and he gave an explanation on what he said. So if you had just read the brisa and the brisa says that what? You have to build the fence when the water comes, holo tesaya, you would not have been able to learn what I just said. It would not have, it's not a raya, lo tesaya. What does it mean it's no raya? In other words, from the brisa alone, you would not have been able to extrapolate that my pshat. Why? Hacha b'maya skinan, because you know what the brisa is talking about. B'de'ika omrin, where there are sheaves of grain that were put together and they're sitting in the field. What is a sheaf of grain? Metaltalin. A sheaf of grain is metaltalin. It's a movable object. So Rava is slugging up the brisa. He's saying, no, from the brisa alone, I would have thought that if you have a metaltalin sitting on the karka, you have to protect the metaltalin. I'm going further and I'm saying you got to protect the karka, not just the metaltalin. So
but the metaltalin is similar to everything else that was enumerated before. So how can Rava say, no, but you needed these extra words for metaltalin? I mean,
no. What Rava is saying is that brisa meant to tell us that if you have metaltalin sitting in the field, you have to protect it. I, Rava, am going one step further and saying you have to protect the actual property. But he's saying that that's not what the brisa is saying. Rava is saying that the brisa is really
talking about things on the property.
On the property,
right.
Frank the Gemara, Ika Omrin. If you're right, Rava, that the brisa is only talking about Omrin, Mila Memra, what's the chiddush? We know that from the pasuk in the Torah that all of the metaltalin has to be protected. So what? The Bryce is going to tell us, oh, by the way, besides protecting cows and animals and everything else, you have to protect a sheaf of wheat sitting on the ground. That makes no sense.
Right.
The Bryce isn't going to tell us a chiddush that we already know the answer to. Ma'ala memra. Emfret the Gemara, lo tzricha. No, the ispe omrim the tzricha la'ara. They are sheaves that have been gathered, but they're still connected to the ground because they're not yet ripe. Ma'u de tema. I would have thought, given the tzarchal ara, since they need the land, kigufa the ara damyan, that since they need the land, they are really like the land. Amash malan, they are not like the land, they are metaltalin. So Rava says that brisa gave us a chiddush. What's the chiddush in the brisa? The chiddush in the brisa is that a sheaf that is a metaltalin, but it still needs the yanika, the sustenance from the ground, is considered a metaltalin, and you have to protect it. But I, Rava, am being mechadish that besides protecting the metaltalin, you still have to protect the karka. So that's very interesting, his answer. But let me just say that many of the Rishonim in reading this Gemara aren't convinced that that's what Rava is saying. In other words, Rava is trying to say that the Brisa is really speaking about metaltalin, but it's metaltalin that you might think is karka. So the Brisa says it's not karka, it's metaltalin. So comes Rava and is mechadish and says karka. There are many Rishonim who interpret the Brisa exactly like Rava, like Rava, meaning it's karka, not metaltalin. So it's not clear cut that this Brisa isn't really saying the same thing as Rava. You understand? In other words, Rava is making a distinction and saying, no, the Brisa is talking about metaltalin, but a different type of metaltalin. The metaltalin is mechuba lekarka. So you might think it is this. No, it's that. It's really metal. Fine, okay. But not everybody's convinced that Brisa isn't exactly like what Rava is saying. I mean, just that you understand, there's a machlokes here that not everybody understands this Gemara the way it's being presented, that that Rava is right, that the Brisa is not a raya. Some are saying the Brisa is very much a raya to what Rava is saying.
What was the first part of this before it said L'chol Avedas Achicha? What was the first part of that sentence? Did it enumerate objects that you have?
Yes. This is the pasuk we've been learning all along. That,
right.
Simla, Chamor,
So
Shor.
then it just doesn't. It's very contrived, this whole thing. I mean, because again, I don't care if it's a bundle of wheat. It's very contrived. You know, the way the contortions.
Let me ask you a question. Why does it have to say l'chol avedas achicha, or why does it have to say se'ah simla chamar v'shor? Why can't the pasuk to say if you find kol avedas achicha?
You're right. Good point. Okay,
Kol avedas achicha, everything.
Right, that includes everything. Okay.
Right. So kol avedas achicha has to be marber something.
Understood.
It has to include something that the previous part of the pasuk didn't. Otherwise, it's a wasted.
You're right. When you look at it that way, it could have only said that and not the others.
Right,
so
exactly right.
There must be something different here. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So Rava wants them in mechadish something which is very fine, but not everybody. And so then Reb Chananya says, but it's a brisa. Rava says, no, the brisa doesn't give me a raya, and he's okay. There are others who say that Rava's answer is not a solid answer because you can still learn from the brisa the same thing Rava is saying. So let's look at Rashi. Ma'ala memra v'tepikle mishum omrim sheyeshnu b'chlal aveda v'dama leparta desev v'salma v'lama li l'chol l'ravaynu. Why are you including this? It's the same as saying samla. It's a metaltalin, right? Okay, so we've reached a good stopping point, but again, we're going to pick up on this, and what we talked today is going to be the basis for a lot of discussion, especially what David said earlier about running versus not running. That's going to be a very important part of our discussion as we go forward, because you can ask certain questions here. Why is the Gemara being so particular about this and about that? And sometimes it seems a little random, and like you just said, Chaim, sometimes it seems contrived. I mean, what's going on over here? Why is the Gemara being so meticulous for us to understand the nuances between one and the other, between character and metaltalin, roeh and not roeh, or ratza and roeh? And again, it's important to understand that when the Torah gives us a roadmap and tells us how to be mekayim a mitzvah, you might say, and I'm not going to say it's not correct, that there's a little bit of overkill. In other words, the Torah is giving us the minutia and the detail of what the mitzvah is. Is that as important to us as we really need to know? Jay, you asked the question, why 3 days? Go the first day, go the second day. These are all, it's part of the process. When the Gemara wants us to understand the detail of what the halacha is, then it could always go and say, Lefnim Mishur Sadin, you see an animal, run to the base medrash, clap on tish, and say, I saw an animal, then anybody lose it. That's easy. That's an easy thing to do. So, but the Gemara isn't saying that that's the achrayus. The Gemara is telling us that the halacha in the Torah was very direct and very pointed. A person doesn't have to disorganize his life for someone else, except when it becomes time to disorganize his life. You have a mitzvah hashav teshivim, but I'm not going to put that mitzvah on you the minute you see an animal or the minute you see something there. I'm not going to do that to you. That's not a fair balance. The fair balance, as the Gemara winds up telling us, is to use your seichel and see whether or not something looks, smells, tastes, sounds like an aveda or not. If it does, use your judgment and go ahead and treat it as an aveda. If not, don't. Maybe you made a mistake. Okay, maybe you made a mistake. Maybe you treated something that was not an aveda and it should have been an aveda. Again, maybe it's not 100% accurate, but it's giving us the parameters for doing it. So here on this whole discussion, it's clear that the Torah meant for you to protect your fellow's field. If you're a single guy and I'm not astute in how to build a fence quickly, I may lose. I may put a couple sticks together, and before I know it, the water overran, and I say, Chaval, I missed the mitzvah hashav teshivim because I didn't get the fence on time. You're more handy. You quickly did something, and you were able to prevent it. Do I get an avera? No, I don't get an avera. I mean, I shouldn't just look at it and say, not my problem, and walk away. That I shouldn't do. I should at least make an effort to try to protect my fellow's field. But if his field is in the line of fire and it's a large width of a field, no way he's going to get a fence up or anything to protect from that water in the 10 minutes or whatever he has to do it. But the mitzvah is hashav teshivim. Make the effort to try to protect your friend's, your fellow man's fence, and that's the mitzvah. You can only do what you can do, guys. You can't do more than what you can do. So this is the roadmap, and that's why it's so important for us to understand all the nuances, because they won't always happen. But if you understand all the nuances, then you'll understand what you have to do and when you have to do it. And I think that's really what the purpose of this whole Gemara is to give us that understanding. So we'll stop here, and next week, Mitchell, we'll pick up based on this, on the whole discussion, which is a fascinating discussion about how you treat the animal, under what condition it's an aveda or not an aveda. But this is that Gemara of aveda that is, in other words, everything that we've learned until now about aveda is really boils down to what this Gemara is going to tell us is the standard of how you should treat an aveda.
Sure.
Yeah, very fascinating, very, very good. Okay, Mitzvah next week.